Hi everyone. Thank you so much for watching and welcome to this Easter's prep seminar. My name is Rose and today we're going to be talking about how to prep at Easter's. So this will be a session about managing the prep room, ways to avoid getting sidetracked in the first place, but also how to deal with common issues and then just some general tips and tricks for success. I want to flag at the top of this that this is not a seminar on case construction or a seminar on putting together individual arguments, but rather this is a chat about how to approach prepping, particularly how to approach feeding a case or kind of leading on a case if that's something that you're doing for the first time as a pro. So we will do some chat about kind of things pros should be thinking about in the prep room, ways that pros can be thinking about forming an entire case. But if you want a deeper dive on case construction and kind of how to come up with that whole case, then there are lots of excellent resources out there, including some resources from this series, and I would really recommend that you check them out. So this seminar is going to be broken up into, that PowerPoint says 4, that's okay. This seminar is going to be broken up into 3 portions. The first will be about managing prep. The second will be about dealing with common problems that arise in Easter's preps. And then the last will just be about dealing with some tips and some drills that you can do to get better at prepping and better at writing cases generally. So the first section of this seminar is about managing a prep. Prep rooms are difficult as a pro. So this is just a little way to structure your preps if that's something that you're new to doing. So at Easter's, you have half an hour to prep. The first thing that you should do with the first 5 minutes of your prep is the same thing that you do in any prep, which is you sit and you think about the topic. However, prepping as a pro is a little bit different. In that first 5 minutes, novices should be thinking about individual arguments, mechanisms, examples, facts, terms in the info slide, all of those things. As a pro, I would recommend that you spend this time thinking about likely clashes in the debate, likely weighing metrics, scope questions, so potential ways that you could kind of move the debate so that it includes arguments your team might make and excludes arguments that your opposition might make. Other things you might want to think about here are who the debate probably ends up being about, what the degree or size of the change is, kind of in terms of what the debate ends up being about. And in this time, obviously, you should write down every single thought that you have. And again, I would flag here, you should absolutely watch the other seminars, particularly Jack's seminar on knowing things and kind of generating arguments from your knowledge about the outside world. So that's the first 5 minutes. The next thing that you want to do is share. This should take usually about 5 minutes. Sometimes it takes slightly longer. First thing to note here is that there is a preferred order for this to happen in on most Easter's teams. I would always recommend that the first speaker shares first and that the pro shares last. There are a couple of reasons for this. The main one is just because if your novices are primarily thinking about individual arguments and mechanisms, it's easier for you as a pro to be slotting those into the case as you're hearing them and thinking about them, instead of kind of uploading and then having to sit and listen. Some tips about making your share as efficient and helpful for everyone as possible. Firstly, your share needs to be concise and clear. This is not the moment for granular detail or for really detailed examples. Secondly, this is the most important part of your prep. If you have a bad share, it's really hard to come back from it and build a really good case. So you need to maintain discipline and good vibes at this point in the prep. No one should ever be speaking over each other in prep. No one should be using this as an opportunity to grandstand or to prove how clever they are by going into a really detailed explanation of their argument. And absolutely everyone needs to be writing down what other people say. So you've had your 5 minutes, you've done your share. The next bit is case formation. And I would say that this usually takes between 5 and 7 minutes, sometimes 8. And this primarily rests on the pro. The main thing that you want to do really is just identify the best bits of the share and kind of start fitting them together. This is the same way that you would do it in any case. It doesn't change because of Easter's or because you're a pro. The way that I personally liked to write cases when I was proing at Easter's was as follows. The first question I asked myself was, what's our strategy? So what are kind of the ways that we could win the debate? And this might be proving that we create a benefit for lots of people that outweighs any of the other things in the debate. Alternatively, it might be proving that your op creates a really large harm that can't be outweighed. It might be proving that there are no ways to get to the debate's preconceived benefit other than yours. It might be proving that history could only have happened on your side, whatever you want. Usually, I would pick one or two strategic paths from this question and develop them through the first affirmative or the case speech. And then the second speaker's substantive would usually be a different strategic path or a kind of novel take on one of those weighing questions, so that if that path to victory fell over, we still had a second one at second substantive. The next thing that I would do is identify which framing helped me build out the strongest strategic argument. So the strategic argument that's kind of underpinning my first affirmative speech, what framing is really going to help me? And this is where those questions that you ask yourself in that first 5 minutes really come in handy. How can you maybe exclude some of the really good arguments that your opposition could make before you even get into rebuttal? How do you make sure that your arguments feel the most historically or factually relevant before you even get into saying them? So you have your strategy, you have your strategic framing. Then the next thing I would do is identify the individual arguments that got me from point A to point B. So just like literally like that XYZ leads to 1, 2, 3 impact. And then I would front load the strongest ones. It sounds really mundane. It's the best way to do it. You have to front load the strong stuff. Otherwise, it might not come out. It might get ruled out of the debate at second. You just want to make sure that it's there. And as you're doing this, you just want to add a line or two that's like your impacts or your key weighing or the kind of takeaway of your argument. And I would say that all of these things are things that you should be doing at a high level, kind of all in one go. So what I used to do is I would ask myself all of these questions and I would narrate this process out loud. And while I was doing that, I would make everyone, including myself, write out a case page that had most of this information, along with any kind of really important mechanisms or examples or kind of pieces of analysis that I was worried I might forget during the feed. All of you should have a copy of this case page. It's a really helpful way to make sure that you all understand what's going on and that you can all refer back to the case line while you're at the bench. So once you have that page done, all that's really left to do in prep now is to write the case. So I always chronologically wrote cases and I would do it in a very simple and quite boring way, which was framing, argument 1, impact, weighing, argument 2, impact, weighing, commentary on why that wins us the debate. This should take you about 25 minutes. I would say here, this can be collaborative, but on most Easters teams, as you probably know, it will be a case feed on some level. Case feeds have different levels of collaboration. Not every case feed is a word-for-word dictation of the case, and not every case feed is a completely collaborative, equitable process. I would recommend trying out different levels of kind of guidance, leadership in the case feed during your prep season. So what I mean by that is have a prep where you guys write a case completely collaboratively, where everyone speaks an equal amount of time. Then have a prep where you write a case where maybe your pro speaks slightly more, but it's still very collaborative. Maybe your pro is just asking, kind of prompting questions or sort of moving you on in terms of your timing. Then you can have a prep that's even more guided, where maybe novices ask some questions here or there, contribute a mechanism here or there, but it's primarily the pro kind of feeding the case. And then if you really want to, you can dictate a case word for word. I think that most teams have a sweet spot, and most teams' sweet spot probably isn't a word for word dictation. But sometimes it does really work and it can be really helpful. The only way to get good at this is just seeing what works for you as a team and being open-minded about the level of collaboration. There's not really one right way to case feed or one right way to pro. So I would recommend just seeing what works for you. There are some notes here about feeding a case and kind of how to get good at it that I think might be helpful for people who haven't done this before or who haven't done it a lot. The first thing I would say, and this is probably the most important thing, is that feeding still comes after all of the steps prior to chronologically narrating the case. Do not go straight into a prep room and start feeding a stock case, particularly if you're at an Easters like this one, where you have an intelligent ad core who are not going to set you stock motions. Feeding stock cases usually just means that you don't win the debate, but it also actually means that you miss out on the really interesting, nuanced arguments that do easily flip debates in your favor. The second thing I would say is remember, you will not be narrating the entire debate. All of prep really should be about prepping the first speech. Maybe you'll have a chat about what arguments are going to be run at second speaker substantive, but you shouldn't really be getting into feeding additional arguments on top of that case speech. So it's really important that everyone gets comfortable with writing arguments at the bench, passing notes back and forth between each other, knowing how to communicate in a very clear and concise way. The third thing here is that your team all need to be on the same page. It's really, really important that everyone understands the strategy of your case. So everyone understands how you're planning to win the debate and how your case gets you there. You all need to understand the most important mechs. It happens sometimes that people don't understand the kind of individual minutiae of each and every mechanism in the case. That's okay. But if people are very concerned that they don't understand something really important, you need to listen to that concern and you need to re-explain it. If you can't explain something clearly after 2 good goes at explaining it, it might be worth considering whether it stays in your case and how important it is. Lastly, at the end of prep, you need to check in with everyone. Are there any outstanding questions? Is there anything anyone is concerned about? Is there anything that people want you to go back over? So that's a really general look at sort of how to feed a case and how it works. The next thing we're going to talk about are common issues and ways to fix them. So the first one here is time management. A couple of things here. Firstly, your share was really inefficient. Hey, it happens. The only thing you can do here is try to make time up elsewhere. And I like to do this during the kind of structuring part of the argument. It's not worth wasting time like counting reasons or referring back to substructures in your own argument or doing some really beautiful structural kind of like bells and whistles thing. It's better that you get the substantive argumentation out there. The next thing that happens is the pro gets carried away and runs out of time, or they go down a bit of a rabbit hole. Hey, happens to the best of us. The first thing I would say is respect the brainstorm and share. Listen to what your teammates have to say. They're very, very intelligent. And if you're the only one who seems excited or kind of moved by an idea, that might be an indication that you might want to reconsider. Be disciplined about your time. You should really only be spending roughly 7 to 9 minutes on each argument. Sense check yourself and your teammates. The next one is prioritization. Remember, prep is for that first speaker speech. It's not for much else. Everyone needs to get comfortable writing arguments at the bench. If you've prioritized incorrectly and you're stressed, refer back to the case page and rebuild from there. And these are moments where it probably is okay to just full dictate. If you realize that you have like 5 minutes left and you're like 1.5 arguments in, you're fine to say, I'm going to write the case verbatim from here. That's okay. Everyone needs to be cool with that. The last issue, and I think this is the one that happens the most on ESTAS teams, is just everyone gets a little bit lost in the source. The first thing I want to talk about here is just how to know when something is worth spending a lot of time on, and then how to know when things are not worth spending a lot of time on. So something is worth spending a lot of time on if it's crucial to your case and you're the only person on your team who understands it. As I said before, explain it twice. If people still don't understand it, move on. If you think it's really, really crucial, go back to first principles and rebuild the argument. And ask your novices to help you. If they don't understand it, your adjudicator isn't going to understand it either. The second instance where something is worth spending a lot of time on is if someone in your team is concerned about a structural, like fundamental flaw or contradiction in your logic or in the logic of your case. That's something that is worth spending time on and patching. When are things not worth spending lots of time on? Things are not worth spending lots of time on if they are semantic. You do not need to spend a lot of time thinking about the titles of arguments or what year-specific examples happened in. If they're one mechanism in a list of other non-dependent mechanisms, it's not important, move on. Or just drop it. And if it's stylistic, if you want 4 reasons instead of 3, or if you want 5 key impacts instead of 4, probably it's not worth sitting there scratching your head reaching for a new one if you're actively wasting time during that process. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about are some general tips and tricks for success. Firstly, be disciplined, manage your time well, stick to the time frames that I've set for you or that you set for yourselves over the course of your prep season. Be disciplined about what prep is actually about. It's about that first speech and not a lot else. Do not get caught up in your feed. Listen if your teammates stop you when you're feeding and say, we only have 7 minutes left and we're a bit concerned. Speed up, be willing to trim the fat. Secondly, when you're sharing, streamline your language. So be concise. Do not give granular detail or unnecessary jargon. Only highlight that kind of stuff at the point where you are dictating an argument. So for example, when I used to share during preps, I might say, I have this argument and then I have a list of reasons. And I wouldn't explicate that list of reasons until we were really getting into that case construction and feed portion so that I wasn't taking up time during the share. The last thing that I wanted to tell you about was just some drills that you might want to try during your prep season. So a drill that I used to do is I would give everyone on the team 1 minute to generate one argument or two arguments about emotion, and then there would be 30 seconds to share that argument and what you thought was important. So that's one. The second is that you can dictate cases to friends who are pros or judges to get feedback on your own feeding and your own case construction, and bonus points if you get your friends to give a 1A. The third one is practice preps and 1As and alternate everyone. You as a pro should give a 1A occasionally in your prep season to make sure that the way that you're feeding makes sense. And the last thing is get your novices to joint feed a case to you so that you understand what works for them, what they're thinking about and prioritizing when they're writing a case, and how you might be able to tailor that towards them. I know that that was a lot of information to take in. And I hope that some of it was helpful. I would highly, highly recommend that you watch the other seminars in this series of seminars. They're all by excellent debaters who will be able to give you lots of detailed advice. And I wish you all the best with your prep season and with your Easter's run. And I hope that this was helpful. Thank you so, so much for watching and have a lovely day.